In Titus 2, older women are commanded to teach what is good so they can help younger women love their husbands and children. On today's show, you'll hear from older women who will share timeless, relevant biblical wisdom and personal, profound life experiences to help answer your questions and teach what God says is good so you can be the wife and mother you were created to be. Welcome to another episode of Older Women Likewise.
Good evening and welcome to Older Women Likewise. Sorry, I've got a problem with my screen. Let's see if I can fix it. There, now that looks better. Okay. This evening, we are sharing again an episode from a shared inheritance, that is another website that sends lessons out into the world and translated into different languages as well, so that it can be used internationally, which is wonderful. These are articles as well as recorded classes. In this series that we're doing, A Shared Inheritance, Liz Roberts has provided and taught a series of lessons on the Song of Solomon. She presents 9 lessons covering this little studied book. In this lesson, which is lesson 3, Liz talks about chapters 1 and 2, showing how much the maiden loves her beloved, who has been left behind when she was taken to Solomon's palace. In poetic form, she and her beloved express their love for one another, and since she is in the palace of the king, she tells the other maidens how she remembers her beloved. What could be better than to be with her beloved shepherd? What could the king possibly offer her that she would prefer? We hope that you enjoy and learn from this series lessons and from this particular lesson from the Song of Solomon.
All right. So we talked last week when we finished last week. I'm going to go back. When we finished last week, we were at the section of scriptures that this young lady talked about the king, and she talked about how even though the king's at his banqueting table and there's this this banquet laid before him, that her spikenard, her little container of oils, reminded her of her shepherd, that she kept him close to her heart, that no matter what was happening in the palace and no matter what was being offered to her, her beloved was always on her mind, and that he was like a cluster of henna blooms of En-gedi. And we talked last week, I think this is where we ended our conversation, about what this meant to her, that he was constantly with her, that the king could take her captive, but her mind was always on the one that she loved. And so it is an interesting thing to think about the mind. We know this. We talked about this at the very end of our class last week, that prisoners of war talk about this, that what you have to do is keep your mind focused. You have to do things that focus your mind on other things than your situation and circumstances around you. We do it all the time. And it is a requirement for God's children to get themselves out of this world and to continue to think of the heavenly things. This young woman was not swayed by the king, his greatness, and we talked about how these were heady offers. That this was, he in the last piece of passage, he's offered her a queenship. Now, granted, he's already got 80 wives, but he tells her that she'll be number one. I don't know what that means in Solomon's mind, but she continually, because of her relationship that she's already established and is already embedded in her heart with the shepherd, this king really has a struggle to get this young woman to think he's impressive. And it's fascinating to him. And I think it's fascinating to our world when we are not impressed with the world. And we don't strive for the things of the world as much as we strive to serve and to do the things that God would have us to do. And she'll talk a little bit about that. En-Gedi, as we know, is this little area just west of the Dead Sea. It's in a very deserty land. And we were able to go there and see it. And it literally is this little patch of green among, hundreds of miles of nothing but desert. And it had a spring, and you can still go to the spring of En-Gedi. And it had a spring that sprang forth from that in that area. And so she compares this refreshment of this young man as if it were in the deserts of all that she's looking at, all of the king's palace. Everything he offered was like a dry parchment land, compared to what this shepherd does for her. So these henna flowers became symbolic of beauty where one would expect barrenness. And that's exactly what this young shepherd was for her. That, like henna flowers growing in the vineyard on the edge of the wilderness, she would rather have him symbolized by her here as a humble plant than all the glitter and glamour of Solomon's court. He was the flower in the vineyard of her soul. I mean, it's romantic. It's romantic conversation in a sense. And in a sense, it's just about what she loves. That pleased her more than all of Solomon and what he had to offer. It looked like wilderness to her. So I think about how confused the king must have been at his table, thinking about this young woman. This is, as we've talked about, a song. And so I don't think time and sequence is always there. I think he's writing a song about the events that happened to him with this young woman who's been brought into his palace. Remember, we talked about in chapter 6, she tells us, I was out gathering I was out doing what I normally do. I was gathering the nuts, I was checking the pomegranates, and before I knew it, I'm in the entourage on my way to the palace. I didn't want to be here. These are not circumstances that I put myself in, but I am now here in the confines of this palace. And so I think it was fascinating to this king, this young woman was. She had a very natural beauty. We talked about that. She says, I'm suntanned. I don't look like you guys. I obviously don't belong here. I don't fit the palace scene. Do you not ever feel like that in the world? I feel like it all the time. I feel like I am the weirdest among creatures, just being in the world. And so she tries to express this to the women and say to them, look, I'm dark because I've been in the sun. I've worked. I haven't had the opportunities that you've had. And so now we come to this part of passage that is next, and it's almost bookend. So I think that this is based off of the pronouns. It seems that the two lines at the beginning and the end are spoken by the shepherd, and that the middle part is spoken by I think this king had a lot of conversations with this young woman, and I think she relayed conversations that she had had with her shepherd and situations that she had experienced with her shepherd to the king. He had no way to understand really who she was. So she begins by saying, "Beloved, you are fair, my love. Behold, you are fair. You have dove's eyes." He says that about her. And then she says, "Behold, you are handsome, my beloved. Yes, pleasant. Also, our bed is green. The beams of our houses are cedar and our rafters of fir. I am a rose of Sharon and the lily of the valley." And then he says, "Like a lily among the thorns, so is my love among the daughters." And so let's talk about this. This seems like a mutual admiration society chorus that compliments of the lady's beauty are expressed first. He says, "My darling," that's what he's saying here. The one that I love, you have eyes of dove. This is literal. It's hard for us in our culture to understand what the significance of this, but there are a lot of comparisons in the psalm of doves and their eyes. It certainly was most probably a comparison probably to the color of her eyes, a smoky gray color, probably had some incandescence, iridescent kind of a shimmer. Beautiful eyes were a hallmark of the perfection of a woman. We know Leah was noted for that and Rachel. That was rabbinic tradition identifies beautiful eyes with a beautiful personality. So eyes were a consideration. You also have to think about the fact that many times eyes are all you saw of a woman. And so they were very much the windows of someone's soul and personality. One writer looks at these two compliments as a bookend to what she says. And remember, it could be that this young woman is relaying this information to this king who later writes about this, and so it is hard for us to, it may not all be one conversation. But then she says, beloved, you are handsome, my beloved, yes, pleasant. Also, our bed is green. The beams of our house are cedar, the rafters are fir. So the Shulamite now speaks to her beloved or of her beloved, except for a change in the gender and the language. Except for a change in the gender, the language seems to be very similar. I am not a Hebrew expert. This is just from reading those that I depend upon, that I think have no reason to not give me the proper information. And so you are handsome. This is the only time in this song that this word appears in a masculine form. The feminine form is seen throughout the psalm, but not the masculine form. All other times it's feminine, and it refers to our young maiden, the same word. Pleasant, truly lovely, captures that intensive force of how wonderful and delighted he is for how he delighted she is and how pleasant he is for her. There's no need to have a bed with a canopy. You think about what she has been offered. We already know that the king has already approached her in a more private way. She's feeling the ramping up. Remember, we've already talked about that. She's already said he's brought me into his private chambers. So I don't think anything inappropriate has happened, but I think that he is ramping up the conversation about her being one of his wives. And so she's already beginning to feel the pressure of that. And she says, there doesn't need to be a bed with canopies and posters and veils, as would have been in the palace. She uses the word green here, which actually indicates this is actually a word for alive with leaf. Remember, he's a shepherd. And remember, she talks about roaming the valleys and the hills with him. Remember, she's from the hill country of Ephraim. And so they've spent time together in nature. That's where their time has been spent together. She reminds us it's all appropriate time, but she's spent time with him. And so she's being offered a bed in the palace, but yet she says, there's no need for that. I don't have to have that. I have a bed of green that is there for me, a place to recline where they would escape. It would maybe where they had spent time together in the past. And though the king may not be able to relate, it was more beautiful by far than the walls and the furniture built by a king. It was built by the creator of the universe. It was theirs. It provided a chance for them to be together and to get to know each other. She says that's where she spends her time with this young man. There are rafters and beams that soar to the heaven because of the beautiful cedars. You ever get to a patch of grass and lay down and it's surrounded by trees, and those trees seem to stretch up forever? You're just laying and they just go straight up. And so she's comparing these things that are being offered to her by the world, by the palace, by the king, to what it is that she has experienced with the simplicity of her life with this shepherd, just to the extent that she has it. And so the beams that soar up to the heaven, these beautiful cedars, there was no need for canopies and curtains. God had supplied privacy and beauty. And all they needed was a clearing in the woods to lay down on soft green grass, look up in the heavens through the leaves and the blooms of the trees. Heaven of heavens, if they were able to share that time together. She turns her affection briefly to herself. It's an interesting observation here she makes of herself. She could only see herself as a meadow flower. She says, I am the blossom in the plain of the valley among all the beauty that God has supplied, the rose of Sharon, a lily of the valley. And he immediately replies to her comparison, whether this is a playful gesture or flirting, or he swiftly comes to that and says, yeah, you're a lily among thorns. So is the love of mine. And so he interjects, well, you may be a lily, but you live among the thorns. And so it makes you quite magnificent. And so she was indeed this lily, wasn't she? But not just any lily. She was the beauty and radiance growing among the thorns. And so remember, the women of Solomon's courts, for all their worldly polish, sophisticated airs, expensive clothes, overpowering perfumes, I'm sure, and costly jewels, they were thorns compared to this Shulamite. This Shulamite was as lovely and as royal as the lily with its rich, dark purple blossom. And so that is what is being the comparison here. And so, of course, you know, these are Christ's exact words in the sense in Matthew 6, when he says, yet I say to you that even Solomon in all of his glory was not arrayed like one of these when considering the lilies of the field. And surely we must see those spiritual applications to our lives. It's not the outward arraying that is glorious. It is God who makes his creation glorious. Christ says, if you rely on God, you are arrayed, you are dressed, you are prepared, introduced, and presented to this world much, much more glorious in nature than the fashion savvy and the beautiful celebrities of the world. And I will tell you that is so. And we know this in our lives. You know, if you think about who you would love to spend the afternoon with, it would be you, all of us. I wouldn't choose a celebrity. I couldn't name a celebrity to spend time with, probably. They're probably dead, the celebrities I can name. But that's who you would choose. And why is that? Because the beauty that comes in this form is much sweeter. It has a much greater sweetness than the young ladies in our world who have accepted the world as their standard and as the opportunities that they are given. All right. And so it's just a beautiful passage. And she relays these sentiments and these expressions and these thoughts to this king who will later put them in the song. I think it's like a good country song, man, you know? And there was this girl, you know, out of thousands and thousands. Like I said, she's not I don't know this, but I would assume she's not the only one that came back in this entourage. You know? And so she wasn't, you know, she might have been the only one that told him no, she wasn't interested. Yeah. That she had this shepherd. And she keeps telling them to know him is to love him. And they say, well, who is he? And she said, well, he's wonderful. Look at this, like an apple tree. So she's going to try to describe him. And she said, well, he's like an apple tree among the trees of the woods. So is my beloved among the sons. I sat down in his shade with great delight, and his fruit was sweet to my taste. He brought me to the banqueting house, and his banner over me was love. Sustain me with cakes of raisin. Refresh me with apples, for I am lovesick. His left hand is under my head, and his right hand embraces me. And so now the Shulamite will respond to her beloved, sweet, warm, warming words, where he says, you are much more beautiful than anything else in the field. And you are like a lily among the thorns. His generosity, he gives, she talks first in this passage about his generosity. So is my beloved. I sat down in his shade with great delight, and his fruit was sweet to my taste. So he gives and he gives and he gives. And there are so many things that remind her of his wonderful substance that he provides. She begins this discourse with how wonderful it is to be with the shepherd, not because of the material things that he provides, but because of everything she feels when she is with him, because he protects and he loves. We know this. There are fairy tales that fill volumes of books in our world. That the Prince and the Pauper, you know, Aladdin. I mean, all of these fairy tales that we tell our children about what true love will overcome, you know, these types of things. And that's who he was. In a sense, he was the street rat. He was the pauper to this king. And so you think about it, you know, a cedar, you know, might be glorious for its timber. And an oak would have this massive girth and would be strong, and it would be a hardwood. But an apple tree has a splendor all its own that might not be as appreciated. I mean, we know of the cedars of Lebanon, and we know of what the king would have thought impressive, probably not an apple tree. And she compares him to an apple tree. She's grateful first for the protection. I sat in the shade. You ever sit under a tree on a hot, humid day and enjoy and with gratefulness, the protection that it brings you from burning and from the immediate beating of the sun? I'll tell you, all you have to do is take a train trip across India, and you never run out of people, but you run out of trees. And so you'll have a tree in the middle of a barren area, and there'll be 100 Indians under this tree. And the reason why is because the shade of a tree is valuable. It's wonderful. It provides protection. It provides comfort. It provides refreshing and relief. And that's what he was to her. What a difference a tree makes. A tree like this, the Shulamite found. And remember, this was a girl who worked in the sun. She knew what a tree was for. Remember, she's already said, yes, I'm dark. That's because I work. I'm out in the fields. That's why I'm dark. I don't sit in the palace and put lotions and creams on myself. That's who I am. And so she found that kind of protection and comfort when she was in the protecting arms of her beloved. And you surely we all relate to this. We understand the feeling of being anxious and of being insecure and not and unsettled about something. And then we arrive home, or we meet a friend, or we arrive home and our husband is there, and immediately we feel secure and at peace. Children should feel that when they go to school or they go out into the world and they come home, that there is a security and a peace. And so he enabled her to relax and to feel secure. That's who he was to her. Just to sit in the conscious knowledge of his presence, his nearness, his strength, and his protection was heaven to her soul. And that's what she says. I take time again, of course, to make the comparison to the security we have in Jesus Christ. And I think surely our minds take us there, right? I mean, we have to be brought there when we look at this passage, that is where we get to. She receives this generosity and this comfort. She's full and satisfied with his protection. And she's provided this banquet. But we, I think surely our minds will wonder there if we allow ourselves to contemplate. Where does your real security come from when we're in the palace of the world? When our worlds have spun out of control and our life seems uncertain, where is our security? Judy is battling with that now. We all battle with it all the time. Where does our security come? Who are we? She was grateful as well for his provision. I sat down in his shadow with great delight. His fruit was sweet. The fruit of the tree, the tree of the beloved's love, was like nectar to a dry throat. She was parched, and he relieved her of that. How she enjoyed the very thought of it. She continues not just to describe his bounty in terms of the forest, but next as a feast. And now the banqueting. She's seen these banqueting tables full of food. And now she's going to describe this young man. The love of this young man is described as a banquet. He brought me to his banqueting house. That's where we had left Solomon behind. And Solomon's table was no doubt laden with the luxuries fit for a king. All of the world had offered their goods for his table. Remember, surrounding farms and fields had no doubt been swept clean to load that table. But the shepherd from the distant hills, he wouldn't have set that kind of banquet for this Shulamite. What he had set before her would have been seasoned with something far better than Solomon's table. It was seasoned with love, she says. It is the banquet of love, something that turns crumbs into a feast, right? I mean, we get this. She tells us of his banner, one of love, not one that Solomon must have had throughout his courtyard. Solomon so far has not offered her love. He's not even really offered her protection. He's offered her, he's already put dangly things on her head. He's already given her a lot of gold and silver, right? Later, he's going to talk about how he's dressed her beautifully. He's actually really admired her for the things that he had done for her, actually, so far. Now, later, he gets more descriptive with her. But love was not really an issue for Solomon. Solomon just took the women and they became his wives. but not so of this one. You think about, it's interesting, banners and flags and the symbolism of this in this text. We'll go back to this text. He brought me to his banqueting house, and his banner over me was love. And so banners and flags would have been all throughout the palace. We're told that each of the tribes of Israel had their own ensign, their own standard. In Numbers 2:2, we know that. They all had their own emblems of the Father. And according to the Jewish Targums, and we've talked about what those were sort of those books of law. Really, they were foundational to the rabbis in the days of Jesus. They note that each of the 12 tribes had an ensign that are similar to the 12 tribes of the zodiac, which I think, for whatever that's worth. I mean, it doesn't really matter. But Judah, for instance, the royal tribe, the tribe in which Solomon belonged, would have been a display of the sign of the lion. Dan would carry the sign of the eagle. Asher was thought to be the archer. But what's interesting about that is this young woman was surely surrounded by the banners of the nation. And one of those was her tribe. And I think that we underestimate what is being offered to this young woman who continues to want to go back to this young shepherd who the king doesn't understand what he has to offer. And she can't rightfully explain it because he doesn't know him. And that's the way we feel when we try to tell somebody about Jesus and what he does for us. We can't explain it. Well, just read, just study about him, just get to know him, pray, do those things. And so you can imagine that perhaps flapping over Solomon's pavilion were these insides of the tribes. And she describes this banner as a banner of love, something that Solomon is fascinated by her conversation of. I mean, this girl blew his mind. That's why it's a song of songs. That's why it's the song of songs. And that's what Jesus does for the world. It is a reasonable and logical response to Jesus. And at the same time, the world sees no logic and no reason. And yet it is. And it was. All they had to do was experience what she had experienced, and they would see. Powerful persuasion for this young woman. And so she talks about this. The Shulamite has this banner that meant more to her than all the banners of Solomon. Her beloved had a banner too. It announced ownership. That's what banners do. When our Olympic team comes in with the American flag, it tells you who those people are. We announce ourselves as citizens of the kingdom of Christ because we act and we imitate our king. And we should be announced as that. So the banner announced ownership. The banner established that she belonged there. This is the banner she belonged under. That's where she belonged. And so the banners of the king meant nothing to her. And then she describes the beloved. Everything else, he makes everything worthwhile, is basically that she was lovesick. That music and magic were always in the air when she was there with him. Without him, the most magnificent meat was a boring affair. And with him, even the humblest meal was a banquet. Sustain me with the cakes of raisin, refresh me with apples, for I am lovesick. She becomes overwhelmed with her thoughts of him. And she talks about this. One translation renders, for I am sick with love. His love overjoys her. Her beloved is holding her to himself, one hand supporting her head in the safety and the security of his presence, the other hand embraces with tenderness. I swoon with love, she says. She's absolutely overwhelmed at the thought of love. And we talked about how in Proverbs 30, 4 of the things that just made no sense to the writer of that chapter set, the way of a snake on the rock, the way of a ship and the way of an eagle, and the way of a young man with a maiden. That it's just hard to understand love. We talked about what love does for us. When we see our children fall in love, when we fell in love, the feelings, you're almost irrational at times. And so Solomon really is fascinated with this. I'm not sure Solomon ever experienced this. Probably he never did, would be my guess. He, unfortunately for him, probably did not. And so that is what is being discussed here. And she describes this to him. What more, could this palace offer this young lady? She's describing this situation to the king. The king has nothing that he can offer her that is better than this. I mean, and then it seems that she draws the line, that she wants the women in the palace to know. She charges the daughters of Jerusalem that this is not something, she is not talking about something that is inappropriate, that it is not like the king just taking you into his chambers. I mean, you think about it with concubines, they may or may not have ever seen the king again. He may not have even known their name. You remember we studied the book of Esther. And, you know, if a king didn't remember, he might not even remember their name, but they were forever then in the house of the concubines. He may never even see them again. I mean, Solomon, he would have had a hard time with everything else he had going on, seeing everybody all the time. And so what she's talking about here is that there are boundaries between right and wrong, that you don't awaken love until it's pleasing, until it's right, that love knows how to behave itself, that this is not lust she's talking about. You don't understand, women. This is love. This is what love does. This is how love drives someone, that it doesn't trespass where law forbids. That's not what I'm talking about here. Don't get carried away, that it doesn't do this kind of thing. Love knows how to behave, where to draw the line, where to observe its proper boundaries. Love knows the boundaries between right and wrong. Lust blunders into sin, but love observes God's law. This indeed is how this session of the song concludes, I believe. I believe that's what concludes this session of the song. And it puts an end to any sordid speculations of those who might see something improper in the preceding verses when she's talked about what she feels about her beloved. And so true love does not ravish. This was not forbidden fruit that she's talking about. This is the feeling that she had with the protection of this young man. And she wants to marry him. I mean, she talks later about how she wants to be married to this young man. And that there has not been an inappropriate relationship. The last verse of this section gives us a study in contrast. First, we've set these worldly women in the palace. She charges them, like I said, and it seems this you here is where she talks about the daughters. This is a masculine form of a word, apparently, and it's almost as if they've gotten crass, maybe, that there's some, they've already been sarcastic with her, and that maybe they're a little crass. These women don't understand love either. I mean, they don't understand what a true relationship of love is either. And so they really don't have a point of reference either. So they're there to do the biddings of the king, to make sure the king is happy. And so these older women, they may be crude, or they may have made something improper out of this, and she stops that right away. So she says, don't awaken or entice something that doesn't need to be there. You don't need to incite something that is not spoken here. All right. And so it seems the women have either returned now to the Shulamite. Let me go back here. We're going to go on to the next piece of the passage. So I will say this real quick before we move on, that this is something that we have to discuss in our day and age, this appropriateness of a relationship prior to marriage. And I think that we live in an age where passion is for sale. I don't think there's anything, that erotic books and magazines and films are everywhere. Not to mention we can invite it into our living room every day on this television set. I mean, we get I don't know how many channels. There's no telling what I could watch. And so we have to be very careful with what we allow to be thrust upon ourselves, really. And who these ladies were and what they did was they really tried to arouse a passion, just like Satan does. That's really a form of Satan's temptation. And we need to draw the line. We need to draw it firm. We need to talk to our children about these things and make sure that they understand. It's a conversation that we must have with our young people, that it is not appropriate, that marriage is the time when you express your love in those ways. And so it's a conversation I think that needs to be had. So this young Shulamite woman was among thorns, and she had no intentions of degrading the conversation or the purity of her relationship with her loved one, with her beloved, to their level of understanding. And it was about what she would feast upon. And I bring up at the end of this lesson, I had read, all things are ready, come to the feast. Come, for the table now is spread, ye famishing, ye weary, come. Thou shalt be richly fed. All things are ready, come to the feast. Come, for the door is open wide. A place of honor is reserved for you at the master's side. All things are ready, come to the feast. Come while he waits to welcome thee. Delay not while this day is thine. Tomorrow may never be. Leave every care and worldly strife. Come feast upon the Christ of God and drink everlasting life. We sing so many songs that give these sentiments. And I think I love looking at them as we go through this study, because we may sing one on Sunday and it'll make us really understand and appreciate the sentiments of those songs. All right, so we'll turn our attention now, as the women of the court urge her to give her heart to the Lord, to their Lord, to Solomon. This young Shulamite hears the voice of her beloved. Okay, so this is why you can't do a song like it's a timeline. I mean, if you listen to songs, I wish I could think of a song where, probably a lot of honky-tonk songs, bluegrass songs, where you just have things that people say, and they're in there, but it may be over the course of time, or they'll tell of events that happened. And so that's kind of so she's talking to these women, it seems, although we don't really know, and whether she's thinking about a time past or whether or not this is a time that she's really experiencing. I rather think that she explains that she hears the voice of her beloved. Girls can be very dramatic. And there's no question in my head that, you can hear the voice of your beloved when you're sitting at the dinner table with your parents. I mean, I get this totally. So, but anyway, so she hears the voice of her beloved. The voice of my beloved, behold, he comes leaping upon the mountains and skipping upon the hills. My beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag. Behold, he stands behind the wall. He's looking through the windows. He's gazing through the lattice. So the first thing she recalls is his voice. She says, oh, that's it. That's what he sounds like. And so it's brought the happiness of heaven to her heart. She's so excited. This is a joyful language. Do you ever, so you guys don't remember this, but when we were young, Cammie, you'll remember, Terry and Judy, you'll remember the phone would ring. You didn't have any idea who it was. You never knew who was on the phone. And of course, the whole entire family was sitting around the telephone. So you didn't have any privacy or anything. You couldn't wander off. But the phone would ring. And if you picked the phone up and said hello, you would wait for that voice on the other end of the phone, and you would hope that it was the right voice, but you knew the voice, and you'd hear the voice and your heart would leap, you'd be excited. Oh, good. I was hoping you would call. But hearing the voice of the one that you love, and you begin to know that voice. She was in the palace of the king. I don't know how long at this point, or I don't know when this would have been expressed to Solomon or to the women. Perhaps it's the women she tells, and the women tell Solomon. But she hears his voice and it excites her, and she's so excited. So, and later she dreams about, we know she has two dreams about him. One's a terrible nightmare, but she can hear the voice. And so we understand that. Hearing a voice, we become aware of the presence of the person. We don't even have to see it. And the more she heard, the more she longed to hear. And she could have picked it out of 10,000 voices. She would have known his voice anywhere. She would have heard him and known. I mean, I know I can hear Russ's voice, and I know immediately that Russ is around. I heard him in the hospital coming today, and I thought, oh, Russ is here. And I hadn't seen him, but we know that. We understand that about voices. So she draws attention to his vigor now. I remember my Aunt Marilyn teaching this to me. She was studying it one year when I came down one summer, and she would sit and talk to me about this. And she said, I was dating somebody, not Russ, but that thought I was going to marry. Anyway, and she said, there's nothing they can't do. I mean, she explains his energy and his strength. He comes leaping upon the mountains. Now, I don't know that this young man could do that. But she certainly thought that he was capable and skipping upon the hills, that he, what a picture he is. He's a picture of activity and health and boundless energy and joy. And here he comes. And he could leap over the mountains. There was no obstacle that was too great for him. He was coming to be with her, and nothing would hold him back. He was filled with exuberance, with enthusiasm that swept all obstacles aside, and he has this joyous bound. Now, later we're going to see that Solomon appears, and his scene is quite different than this appearance. She describes the way that he discerns. He's like a roe, that he stands behind the wall and he watches through the windows and he shows himself through the lattice. And this is an expression of, he doesn't force himself. Solomon is forceful with her, especially later in the song. In fact, right before the final rejection of her that she gives him, he is very forceful. And his language becomes very hard for her to avoid. But in contrast to that, this one doesn't trespass. He doesn't overcome her in that way. We sing, Jesus is tenderly pleading. Our shepherd doesn't either. He allows us to come to him. He doesn't force himself. And so this shepherd with true sensitivity, as timid, as easily frightened as a wild creature of the woods, such as a gazelle or a young deer, he peers in, he glances in the window, he shows himself. He doesn't come marching boldly in as Solomon will later. And so I think that we understand this, because this is the expressions we have of Jesus too, that Jesus says, I stand at the door and knock, but he doesn't force his way in. We're going to see later the shepherd doing the same thing, that walls and windows are man-made obstacles, and that they could separate in a natural way. But nothing was a big enough boundary. I mean, if mountains could be overcome and hills could be skipped upon, windows and walls would not stop him. However, he would not force himself. But he was also bold. Let's see. It says that, he arrives. First, she hears the voice. She describes his energy. He overcomes obstacles. He does not force love. He quietly makes himself known. And so that she can do part of that. She can be part of this. And so my beloved spoke, and he said, rise up, my love, my fair one, and come away. For lo, the winter is past, and the rain is over and gone. The flowers appear on the earth. The time of singing has come, and the voice of the turtle dove is heard in the land. The fig tree puts forth her green figs, and the vine with tender grapes give a good smell. Rise up, my love, my fair one, and come away. Oh, my dove, in the clefts of the rock, in the secret places of the cliff, let me see your face. Let me hear your voice. For your voice is sweet and your face is lovely. And so he's arrived, and she hears his voice, and he's got this vim and this vigor. And he says to her, and then she says, and my beloved spoke. I heard his voice, and he had come, and he says, come with me. He tenderly calls. He doesn't force. Before he goes away, the shepherd calls to the Shulamite. He has a message for her soul. He wanted to hide in her heart some words for her to think about. He asked her to voluntarily leave and to come back to him. He doesn't demand. He appeals to her free will to choose him, not as a lion that growls, drags somebody away. He was this gazelle. And so that's what Christ does, right? We choose Christ for the same reasons, the richness of the life with him. He doesn't force her. He calls her to be united with him, to leave her life there behind and to live with him forever. He appeals to her logic. What the reasonable offer was set before. Jesus calls us the tumult of the life's wild, restless sea. Day by day, his sweet words sound, saying, Christian, follow me. Jesus calls us from the worship of the vain world's golden store, from each idol that would keep us saying, Christian, love me more. In our joys and in our sorrows, days of toil and hours of ease, still he calls, in cares and pleasures, Christian, love me more than these. Jesus calls us by his mercies. Savior, may we hear thy call. Give our hearts to thine obedience, serve and love thee, best of all. And these are the sentiments. This is what she's saying, that he doesn't force her to come to him. And yet he has this wonderful offer. What a wonderful life was set before her, a life that embraced all of the dimensions of time, past, present, and future, this passage does. The winter had gone, he says. Now was the time. The storms have ended. A new season is dawning. Summer is on its way. The past was past. Let's move forward. Let's forget about this. Leave the palace. It could all be written off now. There was a new dawning. Remember, we talked about how this is the passage. This book is read every Passover by the Jewish nation. And I have to think that it's passages like this that we move forward, that God offers a protection, that the relationship of true love and provision that God had with Israel was always this offer. The storms had ended. The shepherd call was a call to a new life, a life that related to the past, yes, to memories, but it also talked about the future. It was a life that related also the present. He talks about the present as well, a life of beauty, spring carpets, fields of flowers, not possibly what the king thought was beautiful, but what she knew was beautiful. He wanted to fill her life with beauty. That's the first thing he wants for her. Instead of the bleakness and the barrenness of the world's cold and stormy winter, he wants to bring beauty and song to her life. The turtle dove, pure and gentle, willing to make his home with man. He brings into the human heart all the blessings of a beautiful spring day. Love is alive. In her, the turtle dove and the beloved. The prospect of the fig tree is related here. Taking into consideration the Shulamite's current restrictive circumstances, he fills her with rich promises. The fig tree puts green figs out. The vines and the tender grapes give good smells. And he offers her those things. Yes, they may not be the banqueting table of a king, but they would sustain her for life. And I don't know if the analogies are proper or not, but there is no doubt that there were signs of new life everywhere. The shepherd speaks of a new life, and the appeal is logical. There was a goodness and a blessing to be had were she to come with him. If she would just let herself come away with him. There was a goodness that he offered. And it is reasonable. You know, that's what our passage in Romans says, that you want to know how to be a living sacrifice? Just understand that that's the logical and reasonable response to everything Christ does for us. It's easy to crawl up on the altar and be offered and sacrificed if we know that we're given new life and beauty. And it will be rich and it will be successful. Maybe not the way the king offered, maybe not what the world sees, but in Christ it is. And it's emotional. Then he asked her, oh, my dove, in the clefts of the rock and the secret places, let me see your face. Please come to me. Let me hear your voice. For your voice is sweet and your face is lovely. He longs for a response from this one to whom he had given his heart. Love by the very nature is willing to give and give and give and give. But I will tell you, it wants a response. It always wants a response. It's hard to be the only one loving all the time. And so the shepherd says, let me hear from you. Come and keep yourself in the clefts of the rock that I offer. I mean, obviously we see these analogies. And so in order to reach the highest form of bliss, love has to be returned. There has to be mutual love for that to happen. The heart that loves is ever hungry for a response. And nearly all tragedies of fiction, not to mention real life, are about unrequited love. I mean, have you ever been heartbroken? Has somebody ever broken your heart? I have. Yeah. You have, Amika? Yeah, me too. And we know how that feels. And the shepherd says, I need you to love me too. I don't want my love to be unrequited. And that's what Christ feels. You ever think about that? That if we don't answer, and he gives, and he gives, and he gives, and we say, that's wonderful. Oh, by the way, could you give just a little bit more? And could you just do a little bit more? And could I just ask a little bit more? And we don't say, okay, I'm going to show you love back because I love you as much as you love me. Or maybe that's impossible. And so a broken heart is one of the most dreadful things that anybody can go through. And God doesn't want to go through it. He didn't want to in the Old Testament when his nation was compared as a bride. And Christ doesn't want to with his bride. And so we must remember to always love back. And love requires action. Christ acted for us, didn't he? He came and taught us. He comforts us. He protects us. He feeds us. He is the everlasting life. He is the living water. He is the bread of life. He gave his body for us. He sits and rules with an iron rod the nations of the world so that things will be good for us. Not good as in everything's going to be wonderful, whether we die or are martyrs or whatever, it's good for us. How can we not love him back? And that's what the shepherd said. He said, don't leave me without an answer. We ever leave Christ without an answer? We don't respond to the needs. We're just too tired. You know, later she has a dream and he knocks at the door and she says, oh, not convenient. I've washed my feet. I'm ready for bed. I've already gone to bed. It's just not a good time. And we can do that. I'm tired. It's not a good day. I don't feel like it. I'm not good at that. And so we begin to see in this song this mutual expectation that the shepherd has for this young woman. He believes that she has control to do what she wants to do. I think it's interesting. He believes that she can do this very thing, that she can answer in response back to him. Something to think about. We have to return the love. I mean, the cleft of the rock is there for us. Obviously, we sing about it. Do we really hide in it? Do we go? Are we drawn? Draw near to God and he will draw near to you. I mean, we quote all these things. We sing all these things. Draw me nearer, 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 precious Lord. And then we, kind of walk away. Draw me nearer, 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 but just don't make me read this because I just don't understand it. But draw me nearer. We just have to get it together. And this young woman was beginning to have demands made by the shepherd. And he was going to expect something from her. And the king was still wooing her. And she really has to figure out who she is and what she's going to be. And what's going to really give her the joy. And so that's where we are when we end our class tonight. Where is our joy? Do we accept the invitation? Do we leave the world and go to our shepherd? There it is. How about that? All right, I'm going to end the recording and then we can talk if anybody would like to.